Hey, folks, welcome back to the Enemies List podcast. And today we have a special 12 episode podcast series beginning here. It's Trump's Project 2025 Up Close and Personal. This is a joint David Pepper Resolute Square production about David's book and of the same name. And what it is a series of very personal stories about what Project 2025 and Donald Trump's policies and promises, if they are executed, will look like in this country. You can order the book. It's linked in the episode description. I hope you will. It's terrific. And we hope you'll share this widely because this first episode you're going to hear is about deportation, a policy that Trump has promised repeatedly, a policy that is at the center of Project 2025 and Trump's anti-immigration policy. And this is the kind of story that isn't told like a Washington, D.C. policy book or a legislative fight. This is a story about how people are impacted by the policies that Trump and Project 2025 want to impose on this country. I think it's riveting. I think it's moving as hell. I think you'll be disturbed, and I hope you'll be motivated by it because this is what we're fighting. Enjoy this episode, and we will talk to you again on the next show.
There was also maintained what was called an enemies list, which was rather expensive and continually being updated.
Democrats want Republicans dead.
Where I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay?
The women with the least likelihood of getting pregnant are the ones most worried about having abortions.
On January 6th of 2021, you had tens of thousands of people peacefully protesting.
No, it's not a right-wing conspiracy theory. It's not QAnon. It's real.
Hey folks, it's Rick Wilson. As always, your host here on the Enemies List podcast. I am delighted to be joined today by David Pepper. As you all know, David Pepper is one of the smartest guys in politics. He is a guy who has helped engineer some major victories in a red state, Ohio, in the last few years. And not only has David, become a keen observer of how to make the Democratic Party more effective in our system, but he's also somebody who has written a fantastic set of stories about the impact of Project 2025. By turning them into fiction, he's told these in a narrative way. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later in the show. But first, David, I want to lead out and thank you for coming on as always. Always appreciate your insights. I want to ask you where you see the resistance to Trump in the country as of today. He has not been sworn in yet. I see a little bit of dysfunction and chaos and sadness out there in the world. What are you seeing right now? Anything that gives you optimism or pessimism or any direction you think that folks who oppose Trump should be taking at the moment?
I think what I see is not all that different from after 16. I think we're still in a period of a little bit of, I would say, mourning, chaos, not really people not knowing really what to do. I think that's normal. I mean, again, I've been through this before we're 16, so it wasn't as shocking to me what happened. But given the last couple of months and the ups and downs, I think my sense is people still feel pretty defeated. And that's not ideal, but it is. I think it is what it is. That's just my perception. But I think the key is that while that's true right now, we have to make it not true pretty quickly. I think whether it's a matter of truth telling, whether it's a matter of gearing up for 26, whether it's a matter of just seeing through what they're doing, I think we're going to have to get up off the mat quickly. But I worry and right now we're not there. But I also kind of get it. I mean, they put it all on the line. The results are stunning in one way, but it's even more stunning when you take every day and watch what they're doing. But to be clear, and I wrote this to a friend of mine who's literally studies global sort of politics and move towards autocracy, wrote me an email that was so shockingly down that I took. This wasn't just some average person. This was someone who studies this stuff. Who her email was so down and so fearful. I took some time to respond with what I think we should use to motivate ourselves. And what I told her was, I worry too, but I still feel resolve. And we can go through it over the course of the story. There are a number of things that should motivate us to push back. The fact that 26 could be a very opportune year if we do things right. The fact that if we let the worst of what they're doing settle in, it settles in for much longer than if we fight back sooner. The fact that heroes of our past have overcome far more than what we face right now. Suffragists and civil rights leaders, they came back through so much more than what we face, through far longer odds with far fewer allies. So there's a lot of reason to get up off the mat, and we obviously need to do that, in the coming weeks and months. And the consequences of us doing that effectively will be enormous long term.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And I've talked to a lot of people also who are very depressed, very down, very worried. They're like, he can't be stopped. Nothing can be done. And I have to remind them, 2016 was a worse outcome in many ways, because he still had the cover of semi-respectable people around him. He still had the cover of there are grown-ups around Trump. There are mature Washington hands who are going to guide him away from the worst of his impulses. That was not true, to a great degree. Those people were in the administration, but they had to play everything under the table. Now we know who this guy is. We understand exactly who and what he is. And I don't think anybody's going to be tricked or fooled or taken in by Trump at this point. No one thinks anything good will come out of this. And so being prepared for it, I think, is a very different way than it was, back in 16. There were very few, he has no cover this time.
Yeah. And I'm sure you talked about it on your show. They're way over, they're claiming a mandate that doesn't exist. And so, I mean, it's easy to forget.
Correct.
All the anti-vax stuff to the average person is nuts. Pardoning January 6 people is deeply unpopular. They're going to do some really, really unpopular things. If he does mass deportation and if he does tariffs, we're going to have much worse inflation. So the point is, there's going to be, in the near term, there's going to be a lot of pain. Let's be clear. We need to protect people who are at risk. At the same time, we need to gear up for the opportunity, which is, frankly, somewhat like 2006. This is the second term of Trump's presidency. And we know in midterms of second
always
terms,
a downhill race.
Yes. The best year in Ohio in decades was 2006. We win the governor's race. We win the Senate race, destroying the other side. I mean, Sherrod Brown destroyed Mike DeWine. Ted Strickland destroyed Ken Blackwell, won counties we've never won since. And we don't know what's going to happen, but we should be preparing if that moment comes where they've over sort of played their mandate, which hardly exists. Our side will be energized.
Right. Trump
voters generally have not shown up in midterms. You put that all together, and the reason we should be preparing now through 25 is if that moment arises, you want to have done the homework and the legwork to take advantage of that opportunity. That's the other reason. At some point very soon, you get up and you keep going, because these things, yes, there's going to be some very sobering things happening, but it's similar moments. By the way, I say this, I was on the ballot in Obama's second midterm. It was awful. No one showed up. Like they were fired up. Like, I've lived the other side of this, just like we know how Democrats succeeded in 2006.
I think it's important to remind people of those midterm and off-year election behaviors, because 1994, the perception of corruption with the House Bank and the House Post Office scandal, people don't remember any of these now. And Bill Clinton, a little sense that Bill Clinton had overreached by a lot of Americans in the middle as well, set up this enormous Republican blowout that year. As you mentioned, 2006, George Bush, we had, the economy was staggering a bit. The war had gone into its sixth year or fifth year. It was deeply unpopular. Democrats blow it out. Barack Obama in 2010, there was a perception that he had gone too far on healthcare, and in 2010, a combination of race and healthcare blew out the Democrats again in the House. We see these back and forth, and these big swings don't happen in the on years traditionally; they happen in the off years. And I think you're right. I think that if we do this right and we stay strong and don't follow every Trump thing, what Trump does, don't follow it down every rabbit hole. I think there's a real chance that you end up in a position where we have a not just a narrow House majority, but a meaningful number in the House, which does start to protect the country from the worst ideas and the worst excesses that Trump would want to impose.
Yeah, I also think you have what happened in 2010, where you have a real opportunity at the state house level, and that's those in many ways were the districts that were most responsive in '08. Karl Rove wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. We're going for a state house district in Portsmouth, Ohio. He named his targets in early 2010. And those level races, that's where the hundreds of Democrats who'd been in office lost. And that state house power has really been the heart of the Republican comeback since Obama won was there. And 100%. So I think that there's Congress, there's Senate seats, but it's going to be, are Democrats smart enough to run in more places and to run in districts that feel pretty red, not knowing that, again, in years analogous to this, people won that no one expected to win because of a broader sort of pushback against a mandate that was felt like overplayed. In this case, I mean, we've already said it, but they're going to dramatically overplay. I mean, all the Kash Patel, the Hex, all of it. And I do think, there's going to be some Trump diehards who love it. But in a midterm, you also will get in a lot of states, the folks more in the middle who will see a need for balance. And you also, at least in recent midterms, you've seen a real differential in turnout where Trump's folks just haven't shown up. Now, they'll try and change that this time. But yeah, there's a real opportunity at that state house level, which in many ways is a place where you can get even more direct response in some of the federal races. And those are long-term. Those gains there have real long-term impacts because of the role that state houses can play to shape democracy.
I think that's really important to keep in mind is that the state houses, folks. I know a lot of you have talked to me. I've heard this a lot, David. You are very much an expert on this. People say to me, "What can we do about redistricting? What can we do about?" Well, you have to win state elections. You have to win state assembly and state house races and state senate races to win those elections to change redistricting, because that's how these things are determined, folks. At federal districts are drawn state by state by state, and if you want districts that are more fair and equitable and divided, in states that don't look like, as they say, modern art masterpieces, you're going to have to go win some state house seats. If they have a supermajority in a state legislative body, they're going to draw the seats they want without any input from anybody, and winning those seats, even blowing out some of those supermajorities, is a big change of the political ball game in these states. It makes it much harder for them to do the kind of shenanigans they just pulled in North Carolina or the kind of shenanigans they routinely do in Texas and Florida.
And there's some momentum here. I don't want to overstate it, but in a number of states like North Carolina, despite the top of the ticket results on the presidential side, there were gains made. I mean, one reason those North Carolina Republicans have been rushing through these terrible bills is because they're about to lose their supermajority. Because Anderson Clayton ran in all but 2 districts. Even they literally ended the Republican supermajority, which means the new governor has more power. Wisconsin, because of the new Supreme Court, they gained a bunch of seats in a state that's been dominated by maybe the most egregiously gerrymandered state house in America for the last 10 years. They picked up a lot of seats. Pennsylvania, despite being red, for the federal, kept a Democratic state house they had gained 2 years ago. So more so that the federal level, there's actually momentum at the state house level. And there's some organizations, the DLCC is bigger than it used to be. There's a group called the States Project that's investing So there's some infrastructure there that didn't exist, 8 or 10 years ago. Again, some of this infrastructure really began after 16. So not only is there an opportunity there, there's actually more heft on and more infrastructure and more of a awareness of this than there's been. So again, that's my attitude is amid a pretty bleak moment, that's one of the key paths. And it's sort of sitting there waiting to be seized. And there are organizations that are pretty savvy at this point who know how to go after some of these opportunities in the way that Rove figured it out and knew, 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, never underestimate Carl for being a crafty mofo. He understood there was a weak spot and drove a truck through it. And
He really did.
And people may dislike him, but disliking him is not sufficient to explain the fact that he actually kind of knows what the strategic picture looked like back then and went for it. Democrats would be wise to learn a lesson from that kind of audacity.
There's literally a March of 2010 Wall Street Journal editorial where he told everyone what he was doing.
Mm-hmm.
Like normally you'd kind of keep that plan secret,
Yeah.
but that's how much he was, as you said, kind of brash about it. And then 8 months later, the very thing he said, I'm going to Portsmouth, Ohio to win that state house district. And he name checked his district in Iowa and all of them. And it worked. And what would be very frustrating, and I don't think this will happen, but is if we didn't learn that and we weren't the ones saying, while they overplay their hand, we're going to be running hard, calling it all out at the state house level, which is the most local, and which, if done right, can kind of cut through a lot of the national DC stuff and go right to people where they live. That's how Howard Dean got out of it with the 50-state strategy after we lost twice, and then we had a great 06, and that's obviously what Rove did after Obama won.
So we are going to have a few special elections and a few off-year elections early in the process this year. I'm sure you're watching, as I am, the Wisconsin Supreme Court race. I think that's going to be a big early test of both the commitment to pushing back on a very Trumpist candidate, who is going to run a campaign probably that looks a lot like the national campaign just did. It'll be trans issues and immigration and Antifa and God knows what else. I think that race is going to come into the national focus pretty quickly. What are you hearing about that? What are your thoughts on the Wisconsin?
I mean, I have to
Supreme
say,
Court race right now?
I haven't kept up with it specifically, but this is an important test. You mentioned the Ohio wins in 23. One of the great harbingers of good things to come was the early 23 Supreme Court special in Wisconsin. And this will be a test. Again, we talk about people being down, understandably. You can't be down for the next Wisconsin race. We've got to get fired up. And we were in almost every special between, frankly, when Trump won all the way through November. I mean, we won an Alabama district that Trump had won. It was a very Trumpy district because of IVF. And in Ohio, just to be clear, they tried all the trans and everything else during the issue 1 last November, the one about reproductive freedom. No one listened to it. It didn't work. We won 57-43. Our voters showed up. Theirs didn't. So this will be a very important test. And obviously, one of the more respected chairs in the country is Ben Wickler. And my guess is he will be doing everything he can to re-up. But to test my theory that 26 could be an opportunity, this is a really important race. Because if it goes the other way, then we're seeing backsliding at the state level, which is really foundational. If we want to do well in 26 and beyond, we've got to really get the kind of results we got in specials again between now and 26. And there are going to be a number of opportunities.
Yeah, and I think while specials don't predict everything, they do give you a mood check pretty quickly, and they do give you a vibe check, as the kids say, pretty quickly. And I think we're going to see some congressional special elections as Trump keeps dragging people into his administration. The two folks in Florida, Matt Gaetz and Walton, are not going to be easy seats. Those are both pretty Republican seats. They're redistricted pretty heavily. But there will be other seats out there in the country that are going to pop up, because one of the things I think, Dave, that people underestimate as an advantage for the pro-democracy side is just how much the Republican caucus, especially in the House, but to the Senate as well, is completely divided and angry, and they're really this. Mike Johnson never wakes up without looking over his shoulder every day,
and it's going to be harder for him when he actually has to govern with Trump and a Senate. In the last couple of years, nothing's happened, but I already saw him this morning sort of trying to beg for forgiveness in advance of trying to pass the CR when Elon Musk and Nancy and Mace and all of them are already against it. That ridiculous sight of him trying to get through this now, it's only going to get worse. And I do think that's another thing that could prompt a backlash on our end to the good in 26 if these guys look like they don't know how to govern. And in a way, their lack of ability to govern was hidden by the fact that they had Joe Biden in a Democratic Senate. Now they're in charge. They own it. They broke it. They own it. And whether it's incompetence,
they own it.
Or
they
chaos,
broke it. They bought it.
Yeah, exactly. And whether it's incompetence or chaos or infighting or them actually doing terrible things that will lead to bad results for everyday people, focus on all of it. As you said, don't react to every single thing. But this is going to be part of the Democratic messaging discipline, is find the things that everyday people care most about, that Trump is making more difficult or making more painful. Again, tariffs leading to higher prices, a slowdown in job growth. And people forget this. We had a test run of Trump's policies in his first term. Ohio lost jobs in 2019 before COVID ever hit because of his policies. Trickle down, tariff chaos. And so if this stuff repeats what I think it will, what it did the last time, there will be a lot of opportunities to point it out. And the question is being smart enough to do it in a way that cuts through, and in the way that you're not talking about 30 things at once, but you're actually focused on a handful of things that people really care about and people really feel.
Yeah, I think that's something that folks really need to keep a grip on as we go into this debate over not only Trump's appointments, and his executive orders and policies and his legislative agenda. It's important to fight the fight that's important every day. They are going to throw a lot of chaos and noise and garbage out there, folks, every single day. They always try to churn the water to distract you on things. I think it's really important that we keep a really tight focus all the time on what's important to move actual voters, what's important to move folks who can be and should be moved. Because unless we do that, all this, the rest of this is just noise.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree. And by the way, sometimes one thing that I sometimes, and this is the side of me that maybe not everyone in politics agrees with. Sometimes the thing that may be the most moving is something that we don't think about now. I look back at Donald Trump, and I see how he took things that a professional pollster would have told him he should never bring up, and he used those things like the wall to create entire movements.
Right.
And I think some ideas on our side or some issues on the front end, the professionals say, "Oh, that's not a big deal." But like one example, if he really carries through on not having vaccines be mandated in schools, I'm not talking about COVID. I'm talking about the regular stuff. I mean,
polio.
That could be the thing that turns an entire country upside down and saying that is not what we meant in our 2024 vote.
I think you're exactly right. I think RFK is like an unanticipated danger for Trump, because there is a degree of madness about these vaccine policies that. We could see the first child in America get polio in the last 75 years or whatever the number is now under his administration. I think that would be an image and a picture and an outcome that would be very, 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 very bad for Trump.
Yeah. And I think there are other issues. I did this thing right after the election where, the heart of Trump's education plan is get rid of the Department of Education and voucherize everything, basically. And I went to a community in Kentucky, that voted for Trump, 80-20. That same community voted against a universal voucher referendum, 76-24. They're voting for Trump 80-20. They're voting against the heart of his education plan, the thing that he literally talks about that Linda McMahon will be doing. They vote against it 76-24. I went to the community as the former chair of the Democratic Party and just started talking to people at the dollar store and the gas station, just saying, hey, guys, why do you – and by the way, this county, this is the smallest county in Kentucky. They oppose the voucher plan more than any county in Kentucky. And I asked them, hey, why do you think people voted against this? And they would say, well, I'll tell you why I voted against it. Like, our public money shouldn't go to some private school 100 miles away. We love our local school. We love our teachers. We love our principals. These were all Republicans, basically. And it just, again, it's a hidden issue. They don't think Trump's going to really do it. They don't really see that part of his agenda. But if he makes a move, as they said to me, if someone messes with our local school, we will not support it. That's another example of a hidden issue, I think, that if Trump makes the wrong false move and Linda McMahon does, or RFK ruins it through no more vaccine mandates, you might have people who are happy enough to vote for Trump one time in 2 years think, my gosh, he's ruining our school. That's the heart of my whole community. I'm now horrified by it. So I think there are going to be some opportunities beyond our traditional sort of the Democratic talking points you sort of hear that may be the issues that turn some voters around as soon as 2 years from now, if he does what he actually says he's going to do.
Right. Well, David, I want to talk to you a little bit now about your Project 2025 series that you've done and people always say the Democrats don't do good storytelling. You've got some good storytelling. Talk to us about the project, because we are going to feature that project here on our feed, because I think it is so important for people to hear about this and to get 2025 in a context that is not about an 800-page document, but about the impact on real people's lives. So tell us about your Project 2025 series.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad we're going to work on this together, because I do think it's important to get it out there. I wrote it hoping it would get out there in a way that people would not vote for Trump. And so in that way, it would have been irrelevant if Trump had lost. Sadly, now it's very relevant. So what I tried to do is use the year 2025. Each chapter is essentially is a month. And it's basically imagining what it will look like to have Trump do what either he promised he would do, like no vaccines in schools, or what Project 2025 proposes to do, or the combination. And one of the key things to keep in mind is Project 2025, it was always absurd that Trump disowned it. It always, or very often, would dovetail with things that Trump had promised. He said he wanted to weaponize the DOJ and he wanted to take revenge. Project 2025 is the means to that end. It lays out how to do it. So what this overall project tries to do is show people what it actually looks like and feels like in reality, and does it through storytelling so people sort of feel the horror of it. My worry is that what we're going to see is what's it called? At the very beginning, it's all going to happen at once. Get an executive order.
They're going to bum rush Congress.
Yeah, bum rush the whole thing in a way that most Americans never really think through. What does a weaponized DOJ actually look like internally, as well as to the people who are its victims? What does mass deportation look like when millions of, our entire jail system and prison system in this country doesn't even have 2 million people in it? So when you start talking about mass deportation of 10, 12, 15 million, just what does that look like? And so what each chapter tries to do is have people understand, in a time where the media will be challenged to cover it and where they are, as you say, bum rushing it so we can't keep up with it all, what does it actually look like, feel like? And also what I hope happens here is we need to quit being shocked by everything. It's pretty predictable what they're going to do.
Yes.
And rather than having our head in the sand until the moment shocks us, what this project tries to do is say, this is kind of what it's going to look like. Now, if he doesn't fulfill some of his promises, well, that may not happen. But if he does what he says he's going to do, this is what it will look like. This is what it will likely feel like. And I think
Mhm.
we're better prepared to deal with it and to maybe push back if we see what's coming, as opposed to continuing to be shocked at the 11th hour, then trying to address the thing that actually in the end was actually quite predictable.
Exactly. Well, folks, I will tell you, I know a little bit about this series, and you guys are going to be blown away. It's terrific. Tell us what the first episode it covers, David.
Well, the one, so the order in the book is sort of month by month. The one I think you're choosing first is what mass deportation looks like. What it actually would look like to people within the system, but also, and Mark Ruffalo plays the role. One of the things that's exciting about the project is how many really respected figures are part of it. Mark Hamill plays a soldier. We know that Trump wants to have the U.S. military policing local, protests. Well, one chapter has Mark Hamill of obviously Star Wars fame and other things. He's playing the role of a soldier who realizes this is a nightmare to ask members of the U.S. military to police, protests. The first chapter that we're doing through enemies list will be what a mass deportation camp might look like, the size of it, the scale of it, how much it could really, if you add it up, how much the sheer numbers we're talking about will be overwhelming, trying to actually do the job they're being asked to do. And so this is a very up close look at what a deportation camp would look like from the perspective of someone who's being deported, in a family, and a young child. And on the flip side, someone who was in the reserves in Texas being told, oh, your job now is to actually guard this site. And it's a nightmare for all involved. It's just one example of trying to get up close. What do these policies actually look like? What will they look like? So we don't lose sight of that amid sort of the chaos that I think Trump's trying to create, so we don't pay attention to this stuff.
Well, David, I want to thank you as always for coming on the show, my friend. We're looking forward to carrying the series on the feed, and I wish you the best of luck in getting it out there even further. It's well worth it, folks. You're going to really enjoy this. The talent is amazing. And until next time, we welcome you back anytime, David. Let me know, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Great. Thanks so much. Take care, everybody.